Once upon a time, if you wanted to find out the consensus around some movie, you had to force all of your friends to watch it and, gasp, have a conversation. Then came Rotten Tomatoes. Actually, no. The stars bar on the Internet Movie Database came first. And before that, Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert had their famous appendages. And way before that, everyone adopted some kind of 4 or 5-star rating, similar to restaurants and hotels. And way before that, everyone adopted some kind of A to F grading system, similar to American schools. God help us. And there's a much deeper conversation to be had about the veracity of boiling down one's subjective opinions into some kind of supposedly objective numerical score. So let's have that right now, shall we? But first, here's the story of RottenTomatoes.com. When it first formed in 1998, Rotten Tomatoes had a simple mission: to become your one-stop shop for snapshots of the critical consensus around some newly released film. Or, all of them. And by critical consensus, I mean an aggregate number generated by some completely opaque algorithm. We don't get to know what this algorithm actually looks like. That's a trade secret, of course. All we do know is that it's based around reviews from the few publications RT deems big enough to count. This immediately erases the vast majority of the film-loving internet, because how in the name of all gods could any algorithm reasonably aggregate all that? I know this because we internet-enabled nerds love seeking out new critics and new critical publications, boldly going where none of our immediate friends have gone before, in search of new hot takes to get mad about, and/or new ways to say what we already know deep down in our hearts, but never quite found the words to express. We recommend even non-critics do this because it encourages thought. It allows us to practice thinking. We take that practice with us into the theaters, and that's the only thing that actually separates us from the rest of you. You know that old saying, everybody's a critic? Well, it's true. I just gave away the whole ball game right there. And glorious Godfreys, when they added the audience score tab, they offended every deity the human race has ever worshipped and all the psycho robot gods will worship in the future, when we're all scrounging through the wasteland for canned goods. It's like the Hulk's evil dad says after he gets his superpowers. You really think that I'm separate from you? But like every 21st century robber baron in Silicon Valley, Rotten Tomatoes boosters like to claim that they're democratizing film criticism. Like the internet already did, but over here, in this bit that we own and control outright, because that's democracy. They do this because, to them, democracy is an empty buzzword deployed by hucksters to convince fools to act against their own best interest. No longer, they proclaimed, would we need to read every single link in the external review section of some movie's IMDb page. With Rotten Tomatoes and its competitors, the only one that really matters being Metacritic.com, we could see, at a glance, what all the professionals had to say about anything. Well, anything with enough money behind it for a mass-market release, at least. Whom amongst us could argue with such stunning innovation? Who has time to read a wall of links anyway? Hell, who has time to read anymore? Especially when the consensus is right there. Not in black and white, but in red and green, just like Christmas. Metacritic's major innovation being that they added the color yellow for all that stuff in the vast, mediocre middle ground. Unfortunately, for humanity in general, and the popular art-loving internet in particular, the creators of these websites never considered that their scores might become rhetorical cudgels, deployed by idiots of all stripes against those idiots' ideological enemies, be they real or imagined, and even by some of the most powerful entertainment corporations in the world against their own employees. Don't say it doesn't happen. If it didn't, no one would care if a certain movie's score rose or fell above a certain threshold. And they certainly wouldn't care enough to send people death threats over it. Plus, every 6 months or so, some video game news website will come out with a story about how some game designer's bonuses, salaries, or even their whole jobs are tied to a game's Metacritic score. Let me say this again for the cheap seats. There are actual human goddamn beings out there whose entire livelihoods depend upon the thing they make getting a high enough score on some dipshit third-party website that's younger than most of them still to this day. We feckless consumers hear about this every 6 months, and then nothing happens. How long until everyone just gives up and starts running the same story with all the nouns changed? Like The Onion does with Rampage Massacres. Not long, probably, because this is America, where everyone talks a good game about democracy, even as they work to actively undermine it. The most successful method being to create your own little private kingdom, commonly known as a corporation, and then get bought out by one of the shrinking number of megacorporations that already own and control and set the agenda for pretty much everything we read, see, and hear. For example, at the time of this writing, after a long chain of buyouts, Rotten Tomatoes is now 80% owned by, for all the good it's done them, Universal Studios, which is in turn owned by Comcast. So, shout out to my internet service provider. You suck. Everyone hates you. And 20% owned by, for all the good it's done them, Warner Brothers, which is in the process of getting bought out by other people's internet service provider, AT&T. So shout out to the WB as well. You suck for different reasons. Release the Snyder Cut, you dumb bastards. So let me tell my fellow movie fans something here right quick. Every time you argue about how unfair something's tomato score is, you are doing less than nothing. It's like the NFL. Or actually, it's like all sports in general. Doesn't matter who you fucking root for, the league is going to get paid either way. I can't even say you all are tilting against windmills, because for that to be true, the windmills would have to be real, and Miguel de Cervantes would have to own them. Like any of y'all have even heard of Don Quixote. What am I fucking saying? All you're really doing is ruining internet movie nerds' already completely useless reputations, and enhancing Rotten Tomatoes' reputation by treating their scores as something that deserves to be discussed. They don't. Not in and of themselves. So let's get meta, and ask yourselves, why do you really care what number's next to some movie's name on a website that you claim to despise with your whole hearts? Surely you don't take that number at face value as an indicator of quality, right? Ah, but there's the rub, isn't it? You know that out there somewhere some people really are stupid enough to do just that. Yes. We're all nerds on the internet here, and I know my people. We tell everyone that art is inherently subjective, and that there are no objective truths when it comes to all this stuff. We then all proceed to speak our particular truths at you in as authoritative a voice as we can muster, and then act surprised when people are confused. We've all thought, at one point or another, deep down in the fatty centers of our brains, that we, and we alone, could be objective about things as inherently subjective as reactions to art. Most of us grow out of this in our 20s, unless we're anime fans, but this delusion can persist, and it can lead to evil places. It can lead to an obsession with measuring and classifying everything by some kind of quote-unquote objective standard. This can eventually calcify into a deep-seated contempt for subjectivity in all its forms and all its permutations. This contradiction gnaws at us, like the contradictions in capitalism. It's what birthed Rotten Tomatoes and Metacritic and all the rest of them in the first place. And to pull back the camera a bit, it's created a movie culture, largest possible air quotes, that's as toxic as the blood of those shape-shifting assassins from the X-Files. One whiff of it, and most people collapse on the ground and start coughing out their own lungs, and we wonder why our comment sections are so full of shit. Those are the chuds who mutated until they could actually swim around in radioactive waste. Once upon a time, if you wanted to find out the consensus around some newly released film, you had to force all of your friends to watch it and then have a conversation. Or two. Or three. A conversation with nothing but empty air between you and getting punched for saying something stupid, awful, or stupid awful. That's real democracy for you. Tedious, occasionally dull when it's not outright dangerous, and crucially, not owned outright by two major entertainment conglomerates. At least not yet. We'll see what happens when Disney becomes all of our landlords. But that's not good enough for some people, is it? Opinions are like assholes, right? And really, what's the point of having an opinion if it's not validated by some external force that's more powerful than we are? Not like a god or nothing. Ew, gross. But something that's equally opaque, arbitrary, and capricious. Bonus points if that something can spit out numbers. Numbers don't lie, after all. Unless you're trying to vote, of course. Numbers are objective, as long as you ignore the entire context around them. Another proud American tradition that we're carrying with us into the future. Assuming we even have one that's not just Mad Max or The Road. Fuck. That's a hell of a low note to end it on. I can't do that. This is a YouTube video, and they have structural problems of their own, as much as Rotten Tomatoes. Alright, fine. If you're watching this, I shouldn't have to tell you not to care about RT scores, because you're a demonstrably smart and good person who thinks for themselves, and blah blah blah, yakety schmackety, leverage your parasocial relationship with your audience so that they might respond to your call to action. So send this video to anyone who, A, argues about RT scores, especially in public. Positive or negative, too high or too low. Don't do this. Ever. You're just giving them free advertising. Kind of like I'm doing now, but I am necessary evil. B, argue about Metacritic scores, since the exact same thing applies to them. Or C, argue about any critic's score of any movie, in any form, now or at any time in the future. Read further than the headline, or the score underneath the headline, and argue with someone's actual conclusions. Even if their conclusions are stupid, at least then you'll be arguing about something with more substance to it than some goddamn number some computer spit out somewhere. There's this guy you might have heard of named Socrates. Supposedly perfected the art several thousand years ago. Though, always been a Diogenes fan myself. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to retreat back to my wine barrel. Alexander the Great's supposed to stop by, and I'm not gonna miss the chance to fuck with his head. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you liked this video, hit the like button. If you want more, well, we'll see how this goes over. But if you like movie reviews, hit the subscribe button. Special thanks go out to all my patrons, whose names you should see right there now. Though there's no charge for this one, guys. This one's just for me. Somebody who isn't Brett Ratner had to say all this shit. And when I looked around at all the people who weren't Brett Ratner and were saying anything even vaguely like this, I was sorely disappointed. So one day I just figured, fine, I'll do it myself. We should all know how that goes by now.